What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Billy Goat channel. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a deep dive into my reading history. As you may have seen in my previous videos, this is my book log where I write down every book that I've read. I decided a couple days ago to go through and try to tally up how many books I've read from each author in my book log and try to sort them out by genre, because I was curious who my most read authors were and what my most read genres were, what the longest series I've ever read was, those kinds of questions. And so basically I went through line by line, book by book, and sorted them out by author and by genre. And it ended up taking me several days to tally everything up. This is what it looks like. He's got the authors on the left-hand side and then the number of books that I read by each author. And for some authors, it was a little tricky because, certain authors may write a variety of different types of books. So I had to sort them out like that. I finally got everything tallied up, and so I'm going to tell you the results of this little project, beginning with the genres. I've got 11 different genres here. So starting with number 11, we're going to go from the least to the highest. Number 11 is Western, and I have 5 Western books that I've read. Basically, 4 Louis L'Amour novels, and then Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which I also put in the Western category. Not really a genre that I have much interest in. I kind of find those books are a little slower paced, and I don't know, it's just not something that I read a lot of. Anyway, number 10 is humor. These are books that basically just exist to make you laugh. There's no plot, there's no... they're not really fiction. An example of this, I had a book by The Onion, which is the satirical outlet. They made this book called Our Dumb World that was like an atlas, but it was just kind of making fun of all the different countries and stuff. So that's an example of that. Another example would be like Brain Droppings by George Carlin, which is just basically his stand-up material in a book form. So there were 10 of those in the humor genre. Number 9 is classics. So classics is kind of self-explanatory as well. Stuff like maybe Don Quixote, Pride and Prejudice, books like that. I read 15 of those. Number 8 is Star Wars novels. Back in the day, before Disney bought Star Wars, there was this whole expanded universe with many, many novels spanning from the Old Republic era all the way through, the Clone Wars, the original trilogy. And so I read a lot of Star Wars novels when I was a teenager. I found 21 Star Wars novels on my book log, which is pretty impressive to have that many books from a single franchise, I mean, even if you go to a bookstore today, you'll find a pretty big size section completely devoted to Star Wars novels. So 21 of those. At number 7 is nonfiction with 44. And I was a little bit surprised because I feel like I read a pretty good mix of fiction and nonfiction, but there really weren't too many nonfiction in the grand scheme of things. Then we come to number 6, which is supernatural/horror with 45 books. And the vast majority of those belong to either Dean Koontz or Stephen King. I haven't read very much horror outside of that. At number 5, we have thriller/mystery/spy novels. To me, this is where the genres get a little bit blurry because most books in this category could probably be put in like regular literary fiction, but this genre, it has authors like Clive Cussler, Lee Child, Robert Ludlum, where they write kind of formulaic books around a single character who goes on adventures and, solves mysteries, or, they're basically more action-oriented books. I read 49 of those. Then at number 4, we have fantasy with 60. Fantasy is another genre where you'll have a couple authors that do a lot of the heavy lifting. Robert Jordan with the Wheel of Time series, Brandon Sanderson with his Stormlight Archive and Mistborn series, stuff like that. So I read 60 fantasy books. At number 3, we've got science fiction with 71. And that's my personal favorite genre. Then at number 2, we have children/young adult with 77. When I was younger, the majority of the books that I read were young adult, / children's books. Like the Harry Potter series, that's thrown in there, even though technically it's like fantasy. But anything that was meant for a younger audience, I threw in the children/young adult genre. So 77 for that. And then number 1 is literary fiction with 106. And this makes sense because if you go to a bookstore, by far the biggest section is the regular fiction section. Same thing with the library, any bookstore. That's the majority of your books. So 106 literary fiction, by far the biggest, most read genre. And the grand total, all of these books added together, is 503. Of course, I read many books before I started my book log, and I'm not including, Dr. Seuss or the Bernstein Bears or whatever. So it's probably a lot more than that, but as far as what's in my book log, 503 books. So now let's move along to the authors. And in my list, I found that I had 275 individual authors. Most of them, I only read one book by them. So for the vast majority of the authors on this list, I only read 1, maybe 2 books. And then anything higher than that was pretty rare. I've got written down here my top 10 most read authors. And we'll start with number 10, Mr. Clive Cussler with 7 books. So Clive Cussler falls into the thriller/mystery/spy genre. He's most well known for his Dirk Pitt series, which features the character Dirk Pitt going on adventures on his ship. And it's kind of an interesting series because this guy, he just goes around on his ship. He's got his, comedic relief sidekick, and he basically solves mysteries and, confronts these villains who are... It's a very kind of niche, specific kind of action book, but I used to enjoy those when I was younger. It's been a while since I read Clive Cussler, but he's my number 10 spot, 7 books. Then at number 9, tied with Clive Cussler with 7 books, is Kim Stanley Robinson. He's one of my favorite science fiction authors. Kim Stanley Robinson is most well known for his Mars trilogy, which covers the colonization and terraforming of Mars. He does really realistic, kind of hard sci-fi that focuses a lot on ecological issues, social issues, stuff like that. But I really enjoy him. Then at number 8, with 8 books, is Lee Child, the author of the popular Jack Reacher series. I've read 8 from him. At number 7, we have J.K. Rowling with 8 books. And, of course, that covers the entire Harry Potter series, as well as her literary fiction book called The Casual Vacancy. Strangely enough, she's the only female author on this list. As I was going through this process of writing down every author and everything, I realized that there was this huge disparity between male writers and female writers. I had 236 male authors and only 39 female authors in my list, which was kind of shocking to me. I thought it would be a lot more even than that, but apparently not. It's kind of hard to say why that is, because I don't go shopping for books and, only looking for male authors. At least I don't think I do, but partly it may be that the genres I'm interested in are kind of male dominated. But even then, I know that's not the case. I mean, even as far as science fiction goes, I read Ancillary Justice recently. That was by a female author. That was a sci-fi novel. So I don't know, but I do kind of want to read more female authors because I feel like I haven't been giving them their due. And another interesting fact, when I saw that J.K. Rowling was on the list, I was like, okay, well, obviously, I've read 8 books by her, but I was wondering who the next, other than J.K. Rowling, was the next highest female author. And it turned out to be Stephenie Meyer, who wrote the Twilight series. So that was kind of funny. Anyway, so that's number 7, J.K. Rowling with 8 books. At number 6, we have Neal Stephenson with 9 books. That's another one of my favorite science fiction authors, although he also dabbles in historical fiction. He wrote the Baroque Cycle, which is a trilogy of huge historical fiction novels that kind of covers the scientific revolution. Isaac Newton is one of the main characters in those books. Then at number 5, with 10 books, we have Peter F. Hamilton, another one of my favorite science fiction authors. He writes space opera about these vast galactic empires with, wormhole travel and really crazy weaponry and stuff. He's one of my favorites. In fact, he was like one of the first science fiction writers I started to read outside of like Star Wars novels, which I kind of counted as their own thing, even though they are science fiction. But once I started getting into high school, I remember I went to the library and got his book Pandora's Star, and that kind of blew my mind for what science fiction could be. Number 4 is Mr. Robert Jordan, the Wheel of Time author, and I read 12 books by him. I believe I read The Wheel of Time up to book 11, Knife of Dreams, and then I also read the prequel novel, which is called A New Spring. So 12 from him. I never finished The Wheel of Time, and I probably never will, because when you get 11 books into a series and then you stop reading it, there's just no way I'm gonna be able to catch up with all the characters in that series, and I just kind of lost interest in it. But yeah, that's number 4. Number 3 is Stephen King, and I was a little surprised he wasn't higher. I feel like I've read a lot of Stephen King books, but it was only 12. But again, he's one of my favorite authors. His output has stayed very strong. In fact, my favorite book by him is 11/22/63, which was published, I want to say, in the last 10 years. That's one of his more recent books. In fact, I'm reading It by Stephen King right now. I never read It, so I mean, there's many, many more novels by him I could read. Anyway, next at number 2, we have Terry Brooks. This one was very surprising because I haven't read a Terry Brooks novel in a long time, but he's a fantasy author, most well known for his Shannara series, and in fact there's many different trilogies in the Shannara universe, as well as his Magic Kingdom for Sale books. So I read 14 from Terry Brooks. And then at number 1, my most read author of all time is Dean Koontz with 31. The whole reason for that is just because when I was growing up, both my mom and my dad had a lot of Dean Koontz novels. So I would just, take them off the shelf and read those. Dean Koontz, he's an author that I've kind of fallen off with because his most recent books, they seem to just get shorter and shorter and shorter, like he's just pumping these out. It's probably been over 10 years since I read a Dean Koontz novel, but I might try to pick up one of his newer books just to see what's going on with him. He's not quite as far into the horror side of things as Stephen King is. A lot of his books are just kind of loosely supernatural or mystical in nature. But he always writes good characters, and usually they're pretty good books. But that's the interesting thing. He's number 1 on my most read, but I'm not even sure if he would be in my top 10 favorite authors. This is just most read. This isn't really a favorite ranking. It's just what happens to be my most read authors. But anyway, this is just something I wanted to go through and kind of give you the results of this little research project I did. Anyway, I hope you found this video enlightening. I definitely did find some value in going through this and kind of having all this stuff on the record. And now, if I ever want to find a particular author and say, oh, I only read one of his books, let me see if I can read some more, having this list here makes it a little bit easier. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.